The next 2 days of sailing were quiet. The once loud cheers and songs had faded, as everyone was now filled with a heavy sense of dread. Even though the men with me were all battle-hardened warriors, they had never seen something as horrible as what they had witnessed today. They had never seen their friends get their faces eaten off right before their eyes, or their friends get ripped apart as if their limbs were as weak as rotten wood, and none of them had ever seen a corpse rise up from the dead. When they die, they stay dead. When you are stabbed or hit with an arrow, you fall and die. Why weren't they dead? I heard a man say quietly to himself, as he simply could not understand how the enemy that we had faced could have possibly existed. I knew the feeling, as my childhood fear had been made manifest. My heart began to race and pound so hard that it felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I felt my hands and legs begin to shake as images of those eyes, those cold, dead, icy blue eyes, seemed to stare directly into my soul and destroy me from the inside. I felt like I was about to go completely mad before I felt a similar hand softly go on my shoulder. The feeling felt familiar, calming and soft. The same hand I would feel after waking up from nightmares as a child. It was the hand of my mother, slowly calming me down as she always did. I felt myself slowly begin to calm down as I saw her face. She had a look that said, "Everything will be okay." Hardly any words were said for the whole 2-day journey back to our home. My father said nothing. He was in deep thought, as if he was pondering what we should do next, or or what events will now transpire because of what we had unleashed on that day. We eventually arrived back home. People cheered as they saw us return, but we did not return their cheers, and instead gave them looks of regret and shame, as we have possibly brought doom upon them all. "What's wrong?" someone from the crowd asked, as they began to notice that we did not share their joy. "You all look half dead." The statement sent a wave of pain through the hearts of us all. "An evil has awoken," my father said, as he drew everyone's attention to him, and continued, "An old evil, an evil that has been around since the first people were created. The Draugr are coming." As soon as he said that word, everyone's eyes focused on him. Some had looks of fear and terror, some in disbelief, and some in doubt. "Please, if you wanted to play a joke on us all, you could have come up with something better." A few of the others chuckled, as they also thought that it was some kind of joke. My father, along with the rest of us, gave him a glare of pure seriousness. "We would not joke of something like this," my mother said, and then continued. "We disturbed a group of Draugr by mistake. We lost a few, but managed to hold them back long enough to get back to our boats." My father nodded, confirming this to them all, before saying, "But we didn't kill them all. They are angry for being robbed and disturbed, and in their infinite greed, they will not stop until they have found us and satisfied their revenge." Their faces instantly paled. "Do not fear, my friends," my father said, as he addressed us all. "We are proud warriors who have fought countless battles time and time again, and we will face this enemy like we would any other." He said, as one of the women in the crowd interrupted, "But we have never faced a foe such as this. Not one who is in between life and death. These foes will not flee in terror or try to save themselves from us when we attempt to take their undead lives." My father turned to face her and addressed not only her, but anyone else in our village who had doubts and thought it was hopeless. "You speak as if we've always known our enemy. Is this every time you fought you knew exactly what it would be? He looked over and pointed at a man before saying, Bjorn, did you flee when 3 angry wolves attacked you, just because you did not expect to fight wolves on that day? My father asked the man with a powerful voice. Bjorn smirked and stood tall. As he said, No, I held my axe firmly in my hand and slew all 3 of them by myself, he said proudly. My father nodded and pointed to a shield maiden. And you, Astrid, when your father didn't believe you were strong enough to be a warrior and decided to rip your dreams away by ambushing you, did you abandon your dreams because you were not expecting him? My father asked her as she chuckled at the memory. No, I kicked his ass. Everyone laughed when they heard this, and my father nodded with a smile on his face. And we did not flee when the Draugr attacked us, not even my son, who had his first taste of real combat just 2 days beforehand. When he said this, I felt a wave of pride wash over me, as my father acknowledged that, like him, I had become a warrior. My father then continued by saying, And just like all those times, we will not cower in fear, and we will show the gods that we are all worthy of Valhalla. My father said, as he raised his fists in the air, everyone joining in and letting out a thunderous battle cry. Soon after, we began to prepare for the fight of our lives. We put a line of oil in front of the village, as well as setting several traps as our blacksmiths made sure all of our weapons were sharpened and that our shields were sturdy. We spent a few days preparing. Since the Draugr were traveling on foot, they would take a while to get here. They did not need boats to cross the ocean. They simply walked across the ocean floor, slowly approaching our homes, their anger slowly building with each step they took. Our scouts came back one day, out of breath, as it was clear that they had ran back here in a hurry. They're close, one of the men said, as my father asked how far away they were. The man said, They'll be here by tomorrow night. My father nodded and let out a deep breath, as the moment we had prepared for had finally come. We made some final preparations and made sure everything was in its right place. That night, we gathered together and prayed to the gods to give us strength for the upcoming battle, for it would be the battle of which we have never experienced. Some of us, including me, got our faces painted, and those of us who had chosen to put grooves in their teeth had filled those grooves with red dye, making it look like their teeth were blood-stained. We did this as a way of intimidation, though I doubt the undead would be afraid. However, it kept our wills strong. We then gathered outside the entrance, as those who were not warriors or simply too young to fight took a few boats and sailed to a nearby island in case the worst happened. My father and mother stood next to me and calmed my nerves. I was here with them, like I had been since I was young. With them by my side, every fear I had receded like the tide upon the shore, and I felt as though I could take down the gods themselves. My mother softly put her hand on my shoulder, calming me as she had before. This time, however, she said no words, but simply gave me a nod and a smile. I smiled back at her and readied myself for what was about to come next. I heard loud groans coming from the woods outside our village, groans of desperation and rage that seemed to bellow from the depths of the bottomless pit of anger and despair. Everyone got in their stance. However, I could still tell that many of us had fear in our hearts. Remember who you are and what you're fighting for, I said as all of them turned to me, including my mother and father. Show the gods what you're worth, I said with a confident smile on my face, and my parents gave me one back, as we saw the Draugr slowly coming over the hill. They looked at us with cold, icy blue eyes. Their exposed bones creaked as some of their jaws unhinged and let out an ear-shattering scream that bellowed through the woods. Not to be outdone, we let out a loud battle cry as we formed our shield wall. They began to move toward us. Now that they had been awake, they were able to move much faster than they did before. Some at a jogging pace, but some running as if they had been trained to do so all their lives. "Now!" my father yelled, as the archers that were standing behind the wall let loose arrows whose tips glowed a flaming orange, and when they pierced the earth, a wall of fire erupted from the ground. The Draugr let out screams as some of them burned away, the blue glow of their eyes slowly fading as they fell to the ground. However, many of them continued on, some managing to get through before the fire could fully envelop them, but the others pressed on, seemingly ignoring the flames. How greedy could they have been in their lives that they could survive being covered in flames? The archers continued to let loose their arrows, managing to pick off a few more of them before they crashed into us. "Hold steady," my mother said as she jabbed her spear into one of them. They pushed harder this time, as they were more determined now to destroy our lives, the lives that they no longer possessed. We tried our best to hold them back, but our feet began to get pushed back as more and more of them piled in. The horde eventually stopped coming, and once the last few piled in, my father yelled out a command, and that's when the rest of our horde came. Loud roars came close by, as if a family of bears had begun to charge, as I suddenly saw a Draugr get picked up as if it was weightless and slammed onto the ground. These were the rest of our warriors who hid behind the trees until now. They took the undead bastards by surprise and managed to help us turn the tide of battle. One of our berserkers swung his massive two-handed axe into the waist of the Draugr, splitting it in two. It was not yet dead, however, as it crawled to me and grabbed my ankle, but before I could finish it off myself, the berserker swung his axe right down the middle of its head. Before I could thank him, I began to smell smoke from behind me. I quickly turned around and saw that some of the houses had been set alight. A few Draugr had gone around and came out of the ocean. They had tipped over the small pots of oil the archers were using to light their arrows and turned them against us. One of those Draugr seemed to look directly at me and gave me a wide smile that was filled with rotten teeth. The Draugr now began to encircle us as we tried to hold them back. As my father noticed the flames, he knew our village was lost, and gave the order to make our way to the rest of the boats. We stayed close to each other, covering each other's blind spots as we slowly inched our way closer and closer to the boats. The Draugr were being much more aggressive, as they would dive on top of the shields, causing some to fall over, and those that did were dead before they could even attempt to stand, as their faces were ripped off by the decayed teeth, their throats ripped out by long, bony hands, and their organs removed from their insides while still being alive. As we neared the boats, I felt my legs begin to give, as a Draugr was hitting my shield over and over again. I was beginning to tire. I felt myself losing my strength, as the hits knocked me down to one knee, my axe getting knocked to the ground. I gritted my teeth together as I pulled out my short sword and jabbed it into the stomach of the Draugr in front of me. But he seemed to let out what I can only describe as a laugh as he grabbed the blade and pulled himself closer to me, seemingly ignoring the fact that my blade was getting pulled further and further into him. He laughed again, this time close enough for me to smell his rotten breath, as I then suddenly felt a sharp pain in my stomach. I felt my strength fully leave me, as I suddenly fell to the floor. I couldn't move, couldn't feel anything, or say anything. I then suddenly saw a bright light and a hand reach out to me while speaking in a soft voice. "You have fought well, young one. Odin wishes to see you in his halls," she said, as I now realized what she was. She was a Valkyrie, Odin's warriors who go to battlefields and decide who lives and who dies, and then decides where those souls go. If it was any other circumstance, I'd be honored, but today was not the day. "No, I can't go yet. Tell Odin that there is more that I must do." I was not about to let my family and my fellow warriors go on in this fight alone without me. However, she didn't seem to appreciate my objection. "It has already been decided. Odin has called for you, and the Norns have already weaved it into fate. I called upon any and all possible strength I could bring in order to move my fingers, and then my feet, and then my arms, as I began to force myself to stand before the maiden warrior in front of me, looking her dead in the eyes. "Tell Odin that there will be a day when I walk in his halls, but it will not be this day." She looked back into my eyes before giving me a light smile. "I'm sure you'll be worth the wait. Go now. Don't disappoint us." I suddenly found myself awake, but I wasn't on the battlefield anymore. I was lying in a boat, as I saw men holding back the Draugr while my father pushed out the boat. I managed to relax and lay back a bit as I felt the boat get deep enough to start moving, but I didn't feel my father get in. I looked up and saw him staring at me as we drifted further and further away. I leaned forward and reached out to him, trying to get him to come with us, as I called out to him, but my mother held me back. I screamed and pleaded for him to come, as tears fell down my cheeks, as black smoke went up into the red sky. As he raised his hand and gave me a light smile, he said, "Make your own story. Become the legends that we told you as a child." My mother held me down and told me to rest as the others began to row. She was crying as well as she treated my wounds. These events happened years ago. I never saw my father or any of the other warriors that were still holding them back ever since that day. But I know I will see them all again in the next life. Until then, I promise that I will slay any undead bastard that dares threaten those I care for. I have begun to tell my own children the tales that my parents told me, and one day I wish to be added to those tales.